How a mortally wounded pilot's last wish got him home. Captain Reed Lawson had 23 seconds left to live. At least, that's what his blood-soaked instincts told him. He was slumped against the broken fuselage of his F/A-18 Hornet, half buried in a snowdrift high in the Carpathian Mountains. His legs didn't work. His radio was shattered. He could taste iron in the back of his throat and knew that somewhere inside his flak vest, his liver was leaking itself into oblivion. But he was still breathing. The crash had snapped trees in half and left a scar of metal and fire across the earth. He'd been escorting a covert NATO surveillance op when the enemy's surface-to-air missile lit the sky behind him like a second sun. Reed had ejected late, far too late, but by some miracle, he hadn't died on impact. Not yet. Through his blurred vision, he could still make out the tattered picture he always kept inside his cockpit: Claire and Ava, his wife and daughter. Ava had drawn a cartoon version of him flying over their house with the words, "Come back safe, Daddy," scrawled in purple crayon. He clutched it now, blood smearing the corners. He had one wish left: get home. Not alive. He'd abandoned that hope hours ago. Just home. So they wouldn't wonder. So he wouldn't become another presumed Kia. 4 hours earlier, Ramstein Air Base, Germany. Lieutenant Commander Lila Kerr stood frozen in the war room. The flashing red on the map indicated Reed's last ping. His signal had vanished in a dead zone where local militias made a habit of skinning prisoners and live-streaming it for psychological warfare. She exhaled sharply. "We need eyes in the sky. Now." A drone operator leaned forward. "That airspace is contested. Any UAV will be blown out before it blinks. We have to try. He's alive." "How do you know that?" Lila hesitated. Because she had served under Reed in Afghanistan. Because when her own bird went down, he disobeyed orders and flew a rescue op into a valley full of insurgents to pull her out. She owed him everything. "He doesn't die easy," she said. Back in the mountains, Reed drifted in and out of consciousness. His limbs were frostbitten. Coyotes, or wolves, circled nearby. His flare gun had one shot, but he'd already used it. Nothing had answered. He could feel death sitting beside him, polite but patient. Then something moved in the trees. At first, he thought it was the hallucination again, his wife, walking toward him in her white winter coat. But this was no ghost. A man stepped into view, tall, hooded, with a Kalashnikov slung over his back. Reed's breath caught. Enemy militia. The man knelt beside him, then slowly reached out and placed 2 fingers on Reed's neck. A pulse. He didn't speak English, but he looked into Reed's eyes with something resembling pity or recognition. Then he lifted Reed effortlessly and slung him over his back. Reed wanted to resist, wanted to scream, but his voice had vanished hours ago. He blacked out before they left the crash site. Hours later, a hidden cabin. He awoke to warmth, fire, clean bandages. Snow drifted past a frosted window. The man was cooking something over a small stove and humming a folk tune. Reed's voice returned as a hoarse rasp. "Why?" The man turned. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a small wooden box from a shelf and opened it. Inside was a photograph, an old NATO pilot standing with a grinning young boy. The boy was him. "My father," the man said in broken English. "He save us. Serbia, 1999. The words hit Reed like a freight train. The man's name was Miro. His village had been liberated by American pilots decades ago. And now, despite being surrounded by militia factions, he would return the debt. "You want home," Miro said. "I take." Meanwhile, NATO Strike Team Omega. Lila Kerr was already halfway to the border when her comm crackled to life. "We found heat signature 20 clicks north of crash site. Not militia. Too isolated." "Could be him," she replied. "I'm going in." "That's suicide." She strapped on her gear. "Then I'm already dead." Climax, Border crossing, midnight. Moreau and Reed had made it halfway down the icy gorge in a stolen snow truck when the ambush hit. Automatic fire exploded across the windshield. Moreau screamed and twisted the wheel. They skidded into a ditch. "Out! Out!" Moreau shouted. Reed could barely crawl. Moreau dragged him behind a snowbank. Blood poured from his own arm. He handed Reed a flare. "Your wish," he said, then turned and sprinted toward the gunfire, drawing them away. Reed blinked. His fingers wrapped around the flare. He pulled the pin and fired it into the sky. For a moment, just one, everything was still. Then hell broke loose again. Extraction, 3 minutes to sunrise. Lila Kerr's Blackhawk crested over the ridge just as the flare arced. She saw the flash, the figures in the snow. Eyes on! Eyes on! They touched down in a maelstrom of bullets and wind. She jumped into the snow, sprinted through the smoke, and found him. Reed Lawson. Barely alive. But smiling. "You idiot," she whispered, choking up. "You actually did it." She strapped him in. As the helicopter lifted off, Reed looked back one last time. Moreau was gone. Vanished into the woods like a ghost. But he had kept the promise of a boy's debt, and delivered a dying man's last wish. Arlington, 1 month later. Reed didn't survive the surgery. But his body came home. His daughter got to say goodbye. His wife got to bury a hero, not a question mark. And every night, above her fireplace, a flare gun hangs, its paint scorched, its trigger worn. A symbol not just of one man's survival, but of the moment when mercy, fate, and honor collided under a foreign sky. Sometimes, the dead don't just want to rest. They want to return. And Reed Lawson did.